Red Mist is a controversial real-life bootleg tape featuring an unaired episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. Like the long-lost but recently discovered Suicide Mouse tape, Red Mist was purportedly created by a now imprisoned Scottish animator for the series who intended to pass the tape off as the Season 4 premiere episode and featured the death of Squidward. Red Mist begins with Squidward preparing to practice his clarinet in his room, as SpongeBob and Patrick play merrily outside. Squidward wraps his mouth around the clarinet and is only able to play one note before being interrupted by someone knocking on the door. He walks down and opens the door and discovers that a traveling salesman is at his door. The salesman, a Scottish fish, asks if he could have a moment of Squidward's time. Squidward tells him that he isn't interested and slams the door in the man's face, walking back to his room. The salesman begins knocking again, and Squidward opens the door angrily. The salesman, looking very upset, tells Squidward that the Red Mist is coming and proceeds to walk off, confusing Squidward. Squidward walks back to his room and finally begins playing the clarinet. After performing several off-key notes, SpongeBob and Patrick begin laughing outside, interrupting Squidward yet again. Squidward walks over to the window and shouts at the two, telling them he needs to practice for a concert he will be performing at. SpongeBob and Patrick apologize with tears in their eyes and walk back to their houses. Squidward, unsure of himself, walks back over and begins playing his clarinet again, this time uninterrupted. The scene then fades to red over the course of 12 seconds. Perhaps by glitch, the same scene is repeated once more, which is somewhat common in rough cuts of animation. However, this time, the eyes have been replaced with new, more realistic eyes with red pupils, clearly not real but more realistic than geoanimated. The audio is also completely absent from this scene, save for occasional clicks. After the repeat of the previous scene, a new scene begins with the same red eyes, but at the theater where Squidward is playing his clarinet. The frames in the animation skip every 4 seconds, but the sound remains synced. After an unruly performance of a suddenly dubbed Red Mist, SpongeBob and Patrick are seen in the crowd booing Squidward, very uncommon for them. The scene pans to reveal the same Scottish salesman sitting next to them, also booing, as Squidward walks back to his home with his head in his tentacles. What's odd is that the scene actually shows him walking to his house, with nothing happening in the background, for 3 minutes and 50 seconds before abruptly cutting to red for another 20 seconds, just as he arrives at his house. A new scene appears, back to the original cartoon eyes, with Squidward sitting in a chair in his room that night, with a blank look on his face for roughly 30 seconds before starting to sob softly. Again, the audio is completely missing for most of the scene, until the sobbing begins. This is when the sound of a slide after another 30 seconds, the screen blurs and twitches violently and a single frame flashes over the screen. Upon pausing it exactly in the frame, the viewer can see a real-life photo of a deceased 6-year-old boy laying in the forest in his underwear, whose face has been mangled, eye has been popped, and stomach cut open with entrails laying beside him. Next to him, the shadow of the photographer is clearly visible, with part of the photographer's hand appearing to the right of the screen. After this photograph is seen, it cuts back to Squidward sobbing, much louder than before, with what appears to be blood running from his eyes instead of tears, and the sound of the salesman still heard. The sound of the wind in the forest is also played at a much louder volume, but now with the sound of branches snapping and the screams of the young boy heard. After 20 more seconds, another single frame appears, this time of an 8-year-old girl in the forest laying on her stomach in a pool of blood, with her back cut open and entrails piled in top. The shadow of the photographer is also visible. The scene reverts back to Squidward, now with the same realistic red eyes from before, completely silent and no longer sobbing. The sound of the forest can no longer be heard. Another 3 seconds later and it cuts back to the sobbing, this time piercing loud and with the sound of the forest heard. The screams of both a young boy and young girl can be heard mixed together as the song Amazing Grace plays on both the clarinet and the wikibot added by wikibot bagpipes. During this, 7 frames are seen in black and white of the boy from the first photograph laying in the woods. Over the course of the 7 frames, the hand of the photographer reaches in and grabs the boy's entrails, as his remaining eye focuses in the man's hand and even blinks once. This cuts back to Squidward again, this time staring at the viewer, as the sound of the salesman echoes to it and the red mist is coming repeatedly. After 40 seconds of this, the camera quickly pans out to reveal Squidward holding a realistic gun, looking as though it were photoshopped into the scene. Squidward lifts the barrel into his mouth and fires, with blood shooting out from his head. A day later, SpongeBob and Patrick are playing outside. When they don't hear Squidward yelling at them, they decided to go into his house. As they walked up the stairs, they see his clarinet broken on the stairs. They turn into his room and see him dead. SpongeBob frantically calls 911, as Patrick looks down, sadly, and picks up his gun and places it in his mouth, mumbling, "He was my friend, I want to go with him," and shoots himself, too. SpongeBob looks back and screams. The screams echo, and as he runs over, he kneels at Patrick's body and begins to cry. He too picks up the gun and shoots himself. The scene fades out and a funeral is seen being held for Squidward, SpongeBob and Patrick. The camera focuses on SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick's family, as they sob and look down. Mr. Krabs looks on and leaves the funeral to his house. He cries as he walks home. He arrives home alone, with Pearl still at the funeral, and places a spear gun into his mouth. The screen fades to black as he shoots himself and then the screen cut to static. In November 7, 2004, after the initial animation of the storyboards were completed in Fife, Scotland, the tape was delivered to the lead animators and sound editors at Paramount Studios in Hollywood, California during the middle of the night. The tape was taken into the editing room, where it was watched by said animators and editors, as well as to 16-year-old interns. The tape, which was supposed to feature the rough cut of Fear of a Krabby Patty, instead began with a title card using the name Red Mist. While thrown off at first, the animators continued watching, discovering the tape had been heavily tampered with, as some sort of cruel joke. As a result, 3 animators, Barry O'Neill, Grant Kirkland, Jr. and Alyssa Simpson, were sent to the hospital. 1 editor retired, Fernando de la Pina, and 1 intern, Jackie McMullen, committed suicide. The tape was sent to the police, who determined that it had been made by Andrew Skinner, a disgruntled animator from Fife, Scotland, who has since been charged with 9 counts of murder, including the murder of the 2 children seen in the tape. Oddly enough, after going through the data in the VHS, police discovered that the last edit to the tape had been made exactly 24 seconds before it was watched by the SpongeBob staff. 1 copy of the tape was made, before police confiscated the original, by Chaz Agnew, writer of this article and the sole surviving intern from that night. Agnew has made various attempts to distribute copies of Skinner's tape and hopes to secure clearance rights to release it on several online auction websites soon.